Well, it shows a lot of uncertainty, flux, and turmoil, I suppose. I mean, it shows that Brexit wasn't the only issue that people valued social policy, welfare, cuts, all those things, that those were underestimated as issues by the Conservatives. We saw that young people were particularly interested in those issues. So you had this old versus young divide, which came out, of course, in the EU referendum last June. I think also we're seeing, the return of the traditional left. Obviously, after those years of Blairism, we have a kind of confirmation of, the traditional Labour view of things, in which Corbyn has been vindicated, at least for now. And so we've got these, I think, currents shifting within the two main parties. One of the surprises of the night, as you mentioned, Annette, was this result in Scotland. That's perhaps the only good result out of all of this for the Conservatives at the moment. And so one would think this will take off a bit of pressure from them when it comes to negotiating the future with Scotland. But otherwise, very uncertain times for the Conservatives, and particularly when you just see this speech that Theresa May made, really no sense of contrition about anything, as if the election had never happened. And I just wonder, Conservative MPs looking at that, what are they thinking?
I want to come back to you on that question in a moment, but at this point, let me bring in Stephen Fielding. Stephen, just how stable will this Tory DUP coalition actually be?
Well, it'll be stable. I mean, she can depend. Theresa May can depend on the Ulster Unionists to back her. I think the problem for her will be within her own party, because there are some people who are very hard Brexiteers that don't want any kind of compromise with the EU and want to be out as quickly as possible. But she also has, on the other wing, people who very strongly supported remaining in the EU and might use Theresa May's undoubtedly diminished authority to maybe try to push her in certain directions that she would be uncomfortable with.
But Stephen, isn't it the case that the DUP supports a soft Brexit? And given the result from from yesterday's poll, is there not a clear message for the Prime Minister to rethink her strategy when it comes to Brexit?
Well, I think a soft Brexit becomes much more likely as a consequence of this election anyway, because the majority which the Conservatives now have, together with the Ulster Unionists, is actually slightly less than it was before the campaign started. And every opposition party facing the Conservatives is for at least a soft Brexit. And obviously some want to have a second referendum and don't even want to leave the EU. So I think the pressure is definitely towards a soft Brexit. That will cause her problems because of her own MPs. Many of them, as I've said, are very hard Brexiteers. She's got quite a few of them sitting around her own cabinet table.
And we were just talking about that because there is an incredible anger now within the Tories as to the way in which she handled the election campaign. The fact now she is partnering with the DUP, who are very much behind a soft Brexit. How long can she last in the job?
Well, I think you have to remember that in the sort of DNA of Conservative Party leaders, there's this fear of the Eurosceptic wing, which goes back to, the fall of Margaret Thatcher in the early 90s. And she's going to be very aware of, any possible challenges to her, leadership challenges. I don't know if you saw the piece in the Daily Telegraph today, which talked about Theresa May being warned by Eurosceptic ministers that she will face a leadership challenge if she attempts to water down Brexit. So she's really going to be caught between the Eurosceptic wing of her party on the one hand and the DUP, but also the other parties which are now strengthened, or some of them, as a result of this election, and they don't want a hard Brexit either.
Stephen, certainly the big winner out of all this is Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn.
Yes, he's the winner, but of course Labour didn't actually win the election. I think everybody anticipated that after this election had concluded, everyone would be talking about whether Jeremy Corbyn could survive as Labour leader, and now we're talking about Theresa May. I think that issue in the Labour Party has been decided for some time, but although Labour had a very good losing campaign, Jeremy Corbyn put himself across very well. Labour's lost 3 elections in a row, and this is the third. So does Labour have it within itself to be able to go beyond those young voters and more traditional Labour voters that Corbyn appealed to and actually win a winning election coalition. There's still a question mark over Corbyn on that.
And Armin, we were just talking there earlier about Brexit negotiations, and they're supposed to start in 2 weeks. She's just said in front of Downing Street that they're going to go ahead.
Yeah, but numerous EU officials have reacted today, and you can feel the jitters in the things that they've said. For example, the EU Commissioner in charge of budget matters, he said, we're not sure the talks will in fact start on June the 19th, and he said, we need a government that can act, and he went on to say, there's a risk that things will go wrong. Now, how could they go wrong? Well, quite simply, that the EU agrees something with Theresa May the next day, or the same evening she's out of a job, and then a hardline Brexiteer comes in to replace her, or who knows, a general election which brings another party to power. So anything can happen. This is very uncomfortable for the EU as well. And remember, Theresa May's whole gamble was not just to stay until the end of the 2019 negotiations, but also to be around for a 3-year transition period, which the EU also said was very necessary. EU leaders have said there's going to need to be a cushion between 2019 2022 to iron out all the remaining creases. It now seems very unlikely that she's going to be sticking around for that long.